So, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Great. So my name's Joanna Maycock, and I'm the Secretary General of the European Women's Lobby, and it's my great pleasure and honour to open today's event, and first of all to welcome each and every one of you who's joined us for the important event today, those in the Zoom conference and those also following on live stream through our Facebook page. Today's event marks the launch of our latest campaign with our Brussels Call partners for a Europe free from prostitution. I want to start with a few housekeeping comments. First, I think it's probably the most used phrase of the past year, but if you are not speaking, please can you make sure that your microphone is on mute. It's really important so that we can hear the speakers and for smooth running of today's event. Thank you. The event is being live streamed and photos will be taken during the event. So if you don't wish to have your photo taken, please turn your camera off. For those of you who are following on the Zoom platform, if you have any questions for the speakers, please do add them to the chat box and we will organise and moderate those and get those to the speakers. The campaign, Her Future is Equal, is about setting forth our vision for a Europe free from sexual exploitation and human trafficking, with a central call around the need for increased legislative action. We're grateful to our partners in the Brussels Call, to the EWL membership involved in the campaign, and also to the colleagues in language consultancy for all the support they've given in the development of the campaign that we're launching today. I also want to thank all the colleagues in the European Women's Lobby team who've worked incredibly hard to prepare today's launch, and especially to Katrina Graham, who's coordinated that for her leadership. The campaign is important because it sets out what a truly equal future for women and girls in Europe can look like. This campaign is launched with the partners of the Brussels Call, and the Brussels Call is a coalition of NGOs established in 2012 to end prostitution in Europe. The Brussels Call is a partnership working towards a Europe free from sexual exploitation. We are advocating for a Europe where justice, equality, non-discrimination, and freedom from oppression are the norm, where all sexual relations are consensual, and those who coerce, exploit, and commit violence against women and girls are held to account for their actions. The campaign will be run at EU level and also in a number of member states where our partners and members are working for legal reforms to adequately tackle the sex trade, bringing our messages to their public and political audiences in Belgium, Croatia, Greece, Hungary, Lithuania, Malta, and Spain. So particular welcome to all our members and partners from those countries who are with us today. We also look forward to partners of the Brussels Call Coalition, including not only NGOs and civil society, but also partners amongst the members of the European Parliament, to bring these messages out across the whole of Europe, so beyond those core countries. We believe that together we can tackle social and gender inequalities to make sure nobody is forced by coercion or by circumstances to enter prostitution. We recognise that this is about justice for all women and girls, but especially for migrant women, who make up an estimated 84% of those affected by prostitution in Europe. The equality model is a proven, integrated approach to creating societies where gender inequalities do not result in prostitution and where no women or girls' bodies are bought or sold for sex. So I want to give you a little introduction about the running order today, so what you can expect over the different sessions this afternoon. We're going to hear from experts about the reality of prostitution in Europe and beyond. We're going to hear about the civil society calls to action. And we're going to hear also what key political actors are doing and can be doing to challenge these crimes in Europe. So in session one, the reality of prostitution in the EU, we'll hear from experts in their field about what the reality of prostitution looks like from their perspective, whether they're working in frontline services or they're activists or policy specialists, or whether they are themselves a survivor of the sex trade. Participants, you will hear testimonials, you'll hear facts and figures that depict the violent reality of the sex trade. And you'll also hear many ideas of what can be done at national and international level to change this reality into a more positive vision for her future. In session 2, stepping up commitments to end sexual exploitation and trafficking, we recognize that a systemic issue requires a systemic response, which is why it's so important to understand what political leaders can do, not only to tackle the obvious violence of the sex trade, but also the underpinning causal factors that lead to exploitation and trafficking of women and girls in Europe today. The European Commission has just released its new 2021 to 2025 strategy on combating trafficking in human beings. It provides its plans and recommendations to member states for actions to end trafficking. We'll hear about priorities within the strategy, how it can best be implemented, and ideas particularly on how the European Parliament can support us in going further to tackle the wider system of sexual exploitation. Because while sexual exploitation is recognized as a European crime, there is still a lack of adequate legislation to tackle it consistently across Europe. The UN CEDAW Committee recently released its General Recommendation 38 on trafficking in the context of global migration. This further recognizes the links between prostitution and trafficking and the need for an end-demand approach. We'll hear more about the implications of this for member states and opportunities for action in its wake. Following the launch event today, we're of course looking forward to engaging with all of you through further meetings, events, and online activities. So please keep an eye on our social media for more information. Our hashtags today and in the future are hashtag end demand and hashtag her future is equal. And I want to make a particular shout out to our amazing new communications colleagues, Adriana and Mirta, who've worked so hard for this campaign and will continue to do so. So equal means freedom from sexual exploitation. We can act now to ensure a fairer, safer, and more equal future for all. So with this, I'm going to hand over to Tsitsi Matakaire, who is the global lead to end sex trafficking at Equality Now. And she's a member of the Brussels Calls Steering Group, and she's going to chair the first session. Tsitsi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Just wanted to start by congratulating the European Women's Lobby and partners of the Brussels Call on the launch of the campaign, which I think is really timely to address the urgent issues of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation in Europe. So across Europe, there are incredible organizations, champions, and activists who are undertaking much needed work to end sex trafficking and sexual exploitation nationally, as well as across the region. So in this session, we are joined by an esteemed panelist from civil society who will speak on the reality of the sex trade and the impact on women and girls based on their insights and experiences and perspectives as survivors, as organizations that are working on the front line, and as national and regional activists. We would also hear from them what actions they think politicians and members of the public can take to bring about positive change. So without further ado, I'll call upon Anna Zobnina, who will speak first. Anna is the coordinator of the European Network of Migrant Women. She is a migrant from Russia and an expert on violence against women and migration. And she's also a member of the European Women's Lobby's Executive Committee. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Tsitsi. Hello, everyone. I want to thank the organizers for this event. I want to thank the European Women's Lobby, but I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to move on to the subject of my presentation. And Joanna said very clearly that we're going to speak about the reality of prostitution, and the reality of prostitution and sexual exploitation is very ugly for everyone, for every woman who may unfortunately end up in this trade, but it is specifically ugly for migrant women. And for our organization, European Network of Migrant Women, that I'm coordinating, since its very foundation, and we will be 10 years next year, we had a very clear position that prostitution is a form of violence against women. As a migrant women-led platform that is made of members who are overwhelmingly service providers to migrant women, we have a very clear understanding of why prostitution is a form of violence against women. We know exactly why migrant women end up in prostitution in Europe. We know why migrant women constitute over 80% of those who are in the sex trade. We also know the causes, the root causes, why migrant women sometimes brutally forced, sometimes coerced, but also sometimes they say that they choose prostitution. And we know why. We know what constitutes this choice. And this is important to understand. What is the choice that migrant women have? The choice is poverty. The choice is, including intergenerational poverty. The choice is lack of jobs. Sometimes the choice is starvation. Sometimes, and very, very often, it is male violence, including child sexual abuse. Sometimes the choice is forced marriage. Very often the choice is single motherhood and bringing up several children on your own. It is the lack of contraceptives and the lack of sexual education. Sometimes it is climate disaster, sometimes it's war, sometimes it's captivity. So these are in overwhelming majority the choices, the so-called choices that the migrant women have. It is for this reason that we are immensely grateful to the European Women's Lobby for its continued leadership at the European level and for its uncompromising commitment to nothing less than freedom, dignity, respect, and life free from male violence, including male sexual objectification, for all women, including migrant women whose choices I just listed to you. And the reason I'm saying to this, that now we're at the time of pandemic, and we know already the consequences for women, for all women, will be drastic. We are risking taking women, economically speaking, 40 years back. Of course, the impact on migrant women will be double and it will be triple. And it is very clear to us that now it is the moment that no matter the financial hardship that we're going to face, no matter the pandemic, no matter the rise of the far right, none of those circumstances can be used as an excuse to justify exploitation and violence of migrant women in Europe. And this is what we're afraid of, because what we observe is that there is a conflation, for example, between decriminalization of migration, and anybody who knows our network, they know how strongly we feel about it, including the European Commission, who knows that we advocate for humane and legal paths to migration for all people, but of course for migrant women. So there is a risk that we see of the conflation between decriminalization of migration and decriminalization of all aspects of the sex trade, by which we mean the third parties, the pimps, the exploiters, and buyers, who are of course also exploiters. And I just want to make it very, very clear to everyone, and this is not just, a speculation, but we know that by decriminalizing prostitution, all aspects, because we are very clear, all of us, we agree that we have to decriminalize persons who are exploited in prostitution, who in overwhelming majority are women. By decriminalizing all aspects of prostitution, we do not help migrant women. We do not help to get them out of poverty. We do not help to get for them to have an access to employment. However, when we decriminalize what is currently criminalized, the migration itself, then we help migrant women not to end up in the exploitative and violent and risky situations in which they will be groomed and targeted by the same traffickers and by the same men. But this can be done, of course, only on one condition: when the men who are seeking to exploit the conditions of vulnerability of migrant women are criminalized. When the society has a very clear message for those men that if they attempt to negotiate, to solicit migrant women's or any woman consent, this will be an offense against the law. And this is why we're advocating for the Nordic model or the equality model. I want to thank again European Women's Lobby, the whole initiative of the Brussels calls and everybody who is participating. And I hope it will be a very interesting and impactful event. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna, for highlighting, the reality for migrant women and unpacking, as you have done, issues around choice and what full decriminalization means or doesn't mean for migrant women. So we'll call upon our next speaker, Alissa Arabi. She is a legal expert and feminist activist from Moroccan and Algerian origins. She's the project officer of the European Network of Migrant Women and co-organizer of Radical Girls, which is a young women's movement for a global radical feminist perspective. Alissa is also a founder of a theater company, which is using art to promote equality between women and men to the younger generation. Alissa, over to you.
Thank you, Tsitsi. And thank you everyone who organized this event and for the invitation to speak. So as you were saying, I am here today representing Radical Girls, which is the young women's movement of the European Network of Migrant Women. And I will speak from the perspective of a young woman about the negative impact of the prostitution system on younger women and girls, and especially on younger women and girls' sexual freedom. So it is often understood that sexual freedom must include the freedom to be in prostitution if the person wants to, and that there is an important divide between forced prostitution and voluntary prostitution. And what we defend in Radical Girls is that this interpretation of prostitution as something harmless and sometimes even empowering is fundamentally wrong. Over 80% of the people in prostitution are women and girls. Amongst them, 90% are migrants. The average age of entry into prostitution is only 13 years old, and 4 out of 5 girls arriving from Nigeria to Italy are actually victims of sexual trafficking. So if prostitution was such an empowering choice, what would lead one of the most at-risk group in the world, young migrant women and girls, to be so overrepresented in this? In countries that have regulated prostitution, such as Germany, or where pimping has been decriminalized, such as New Zealand, prostitution has become any other type of activity on which it is normal to do advertising and promotions. So all-inclusive businesses have started to appear with offers including the purchase of so-called sex, with the buying of a beer or any type of food. Advertisements to brothels have popped up in taxis, public transportation, and other public spaces. In some countries, women are also exposed for sale in shop windows, like in Amsterdam. And this has a direct impact on the fight for equality between women and girls, women and men, and girls and boys. How can we raise boys not to objectify girls while women are being compared to merchandise in ads? How can we raise awareness on feminist sexual education when it's publicly accepted that female consent can be bought? So the regulation of prostitution constitutes a major obstacle to fighting sex-based violence worldwide. In the meantime, in these countries, women in prostitution have not ceased to be stigmatized. Prostitution is not actually being treated as any other job, allowing for protection and social recognition. Very few women have registered as sex workers in Germany, for example. So it's around 44 in a country with hundreds of brothels. And what the regulation of prostitution is actually doing, instead of giving women freedom over their bodies, it's allowing the market law to dictate their possibilities, prices, and limits. A study was conducted on young people living in La Jonquera, which is a place in south of France on the border with Spain. And in this place, prostitution is legal. So some French men travel there for the sole purpose of accessing brothels. And this study showed how prostitution has become part of popular culture and how male teenagers between 12 and 15 years old speak openly about brothels, prices, and sexual practices that are being advertised. In this context, buying sex becomes some kind of rite of passage for men when they turn 18, while for women, it exerts various types of pressures. So young women have to be careful not to pass for women in prostitution, and prostitution is also used as blackmail amongst young couples, with the logics, if you do not want to have sex with me this way, I can go to the brothel to satisfy myself, basically. According to a study from the European Agency on Fundamental Rights, 1 on 3 women has been a victim of male sexual violence since the age of 15 years old. So due to lack of access to information, sexual and reproductive health and rights, lack of awareness raising, constant sexualization through publicity and media, and many other factors, younger women and girls are put at risk. A feminist sexual education is therefore important in order to bring forward the idea of active consent and desire as a crucial part of any sexual act. And the possibility in countries where prostitution is regulated for consent to be bought or coerced by a third party raises 2 questions. So first of all, at what price can consent be purchased, and then whether there is a difference between women who are in prostitution and those who are not. In addition, prostitution teaches boys to focus entirely on their own sexual satisfaction at the expense of self-determination of women. In this scenario, any effort to change the mentalities is fundamentally limited. What does this do in the long run? In places with a lot of prostitution, women, and particularly young women, feel less comfortable working on the street and claiming the public space because it becomes a walking showcase for sex buyers. So basically, this is why Radical Girls is promoting the Nordic model, which allows the existence and financing of exit strategy for women who don't want to be in prostitution. It also provides the criminalization of the purchase of sex, which is particularly important. And on top of this, it includes awareness raising for the general public on the issue we are and will be addressing today. So this is, as I presented, of particular relevance for young women and girls because allowing sex stereotypes to be tackled and feminist sexual education to be promoted is crucial to us. And yeah, this model is already implemented in France and other countries, Sweden, Iceland, Norway, etc. And we really hope for it to become generalized elsewhere in Europe. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Alissa, for highlighting those points and what it means for young women. And I think the point you make around regulation of prostitution actually legitimizes violence against women is an important one. And the point around feminist sexual education is something that is really required. And pointing back again to the equality model as the model that we need in terms of legislative approaches. So thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Romina Lopez. She's a support worker at the Malta Women's Lobby. She has a degree in psychology, and she's currently reading for a master's in gender, society, and culture. Romina also has experience of working as a frontliner at Dar Hosea, which is a drop-in center for women who are victims and survivors of prostitution. She's part of the Coalition for Human Trafficking and Prostitution and has been active in various discussions at Parliament during the consultation process. Romina, I hand over to you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you, European Women's Lobby and Language and everyone for being here and for providing us this platform to be a voice to our women, to the women I have met whilst working at Dar Hosea. And I am here to serve as their voice because, yes, unfortunately, many times they are shunned. What I will relate is that will emphasize and will enhance how prostitution is violence against women, and it's coercion, it's extreme coercion. The stories I have heard from the women working there when I was working there, for example, recall how at the age of 7 or 8, they were sexually abused by family members or family friends, and they were groomed into prostitution. Others recall how at a very young age, as young as 12, they were sold to drug dealers because their parents were drug users, and instead of financial payment, they sold their children. And others also recall, and these are stories which are similar, they're like similar stories, you know, the themes always emerged, they were very similar. Other women, grown-up women, related how their husbands, for example, rented out places to send them to prostitute themselves, and if they do not return home with a substantial amount of money, they were beaten. Other stories, other women mention how their children were used as weapons, and if the woman refused to go in the streets to prostitute herself, the children would be harmed. And there were cases where children were harmed and ended up in hospital, and young children, we're talking about babies. Others recall how, due to drug addiction at an early age, for example, as young as 12, 13, we're always talking very young ages here because there's a misconception. People say, but they're older women and they gave their consent. But we forget that these women started and they were coerced into prostitution at a very young age. So this is the same woman. There was a child behind this woman we see today, and she had to start. It wasn't her choice. And last person I spoke to, she told me, well, I was 12, you know, but I could have said no, but I did anything they told me to. They were my parents. And I said, seriously, you know, you were 12. How can you say no? Not even if you're an adult, if you are coerced sometimes, let alone you were a child. Others recall, like, for example, chaotic families or violence in the family. So they ran away. And I clearly recall the voice in my head when she told me, how long are you going to go to sleep hungry? You know, you have to eat. And being homeless, running around in the streets, that's what I ended up to do. And the issue is, which I emphasize, and this also, I've sort of broadened my horizons through my studies and my master's, how culture is grooming our young girls. And Dr. Gail Dines, in fact, she says this beautiful quote. She goes like, before we had one perpetrator coercing a person into prostitution, now we have the entire culture which is grooming our young girls into believing that prostitution is any other form of normal work, which is not. We know of all the violence and the harm that exists in prostitution. Others mention, for example, the grooming through pornography, and which is another aspect that we need to tackle and address, because our young boys and our young girls are getting their sexual education, unfortunately, from porn. And this has to be tackled and addressed. Our young boys, scientific research shows that boys are just from a click away from their home accessing pornography at the age of 10 to 12. And it's accessible, it's anonymous, and it's free. There's easy access to it, you know. So we have to be careful. And they're getting these misconceived ideas that that's the way to treat a girl. And then the girls are so much objectified that they believe that, okay, this is the norm, this is the way. And this is increasing the violence against our young girls and our young women. Others, unfortunately, recalled how they tried to commit suicide because they couldn't take it anymore. And if because of that failed attempt, they are still suffering their disabilities today and living with disabilities. And this is all caused because of the harms. These are the realities, and we have to wake up, because so much glamorization has been portrayed across the media everywhere. If you follow, for example, these programs, for example, in series, they're promoting sex work or other issues related to prostitution, and changing the language, you know, and if striptease are called gentlemen's clubs, and you know, there's all this going on into the grooming of our young children. So I am here today to emphasize how this is harmful, and we need to act together, and the Nordic model has been shown and proven that this is the way forward, and our government needs to join us in this fight, and not like with one hand he's saying we are here, we want to decriminalize prostituted women, but with the other he's saying, okay, there's the green light for pimps and traffickers. No, we have to implement the Nordic model. Thank you very much. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Romina, for the points that you've made. Again, interrogating the concept of choice, and really highlighting how exploitation starts in childhood and then extends into adulthood. I think the point you make as well around culture and culture grooming young people, and the issue of pornography, are things that we need to be looking at as well, and interrogating, or sort of saying, how do we deal with the issue of pornography, for instance. So thank you very much for that intervention.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Marie Mclinga. She has been a national activist and advocate for the abolitionist model since 2012. She offers a testimony about the reality of the sex trade in Germany, where prostitution was completely legalized in 2002. She's also working with several networks and groups in Germany and internationally to advocate for the abolitionist model. Marie joined Space International in 2013 and has delivered a personal testimony in Westminster Palace in London and at the United Nations in New York. She calls for the complete reversal of the German model, which she knows through her personal experience to be devastating for women and girls. Marie, I hand over to you. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you to the European Women's Lobby to set up this event and set up the campaign. I just can sign everything the speakers before have said and told us about the realities of prostitution. In fact, prostitution is violence against women and girls. It is deeply harming, sometimes in subtle ways. So for myself, I couldn't smell anything or much for years, all the good things, because I blended out the smell of the man. I couldn't stand the smell of the man. It got violent. Even the smell of the man, I had appointments where a kind of violation of my personal space. So you can see it's sometimes very subtle working, and you don't even feel it yourself because you think it's a choice. As Anna said, what are the choices? What are the options? An option is only an option if you do have other options, acceptable options. If the option is to starve, if the option is to live in poverty, if the option is not to get education and not to feed your children, I think that's not really an option. So that's the last thing some women decide to do. But is this really a decision, So for myself, it was the decision. That's the only legal thing I can do to save myself and to get out of poverty and desperation. But I had no other options. So how free is this decision? So I will focus on the equality part of all this and on the situation in Germany. As I don't have the name, but she said 44 people in Germany registered as sex workers. That's not exactly true. In Germany, they made this law. One reason to make this law was to get the women into a social insurance working contract. That means that the women don't get in poverty if they retire, because you're paying in health insurance, you're paying with your income in poverty, in unemployment insurance and things like that. And for that, only 47 until now have registered in all Germany. So that didn't work at all. And what makes it really, really difficult in countries like Germany to get traffickers and find traffickers and trafficked women is that you cannot make a real border between trafficking and legal prostitution. Because it's legal, the brothel is closed. The brothel is just like a hotel, and the police is not able to do a raid or go in there and find out if women are trafficked in there. They need someone to report it, that someone is trafficked in there. And then they have to do their inspections, and then maybe they are able. All the big raids in Germany were only about taxes. So they found trafficked women as a side effect, but the only way to get in the process is just about the tax thing. So it's very, very, very hard to divide prostitution, legal prostitution from trafficking, and it makes it very hard for police and anyone who wants to help the women in prostitution who are trafficked. So what I think is very important, and I talk about that a lot, is that the inequality, the economical inequality in between the European countries makes the women in the poor countries very vulnerable. So it's very easy to shift these women from the poor countries to the rich countries, not only for prostitution, same for picking strawberries and things like that, but a lot for prostitution. In Germany, the estimate is about 90% of the women in prostitution in Germany are not from Germany, mostly from the Eastern countries. And if you have a look at the poverty risk report of the European Union, you can see, if you compare it to the criminal report, for example, in Germany, you can see that the most trafficked people are from the most poor countries in Europe. And it happens something, I think, is showing the violence, oh, I'm missing the word, but shows how violent prostitution is. I stop here now, I start again, I'm sorry. But I do not want to say things others said before, because that's not needed. But we need economical equality in between Europe too. I think that's very important. And one thing the Radical Girls said is, Romina said, is really it affects the girls and boys in our culture here in Germany. I'm doing a lot of workshops with young people, the age of 16 up to 20, and they are growing up in a culture where prostitution, pornography is a job like any other, is very normalized. And at first I was so shocked, because these young girls and young men, they really think they have to perform like porn stars. It's not only the girls, it's the men too. And I think that's something really saddening, because they do not have the chance to find out anything about themselves and their sexuality and about others, because they're just performing like they're seeing it on screen and in pornography. So that's in itself is a kind of violation of our youth. So to change a society, I think we need the normative way of a concept like the equality model, to give everyone the chance to live free in sexuality and in themselves. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Marie, for the points that you've made and highlighting, the situation in Germany and what that means for women. I think the point you make around economic inequalities across or within the region, maybe is helpful for us to think about it as well from a regional perspective. And also that our culture really normalizes prostitution, the same sort of point that Romina was making, and looking at young girls. But I think you also then brought it back to the equality model as the sort of a solution to prostitution. So I think it ties well with some of what we've heard before from the other speakers. So thank you very much for that. And last but not least, our final speaker for this session is Bobala Uhas. She is a member of the Hungarian Women's Lobby, and she has been working as a teacher, a women's historian, a gender researcher, a civil servant, specializing in gender equality. And she's also done a lot of work with NGOs as a volunteer and employee. Bobala was on the board of the European Women's Lobby since 2008. Becoming its vice president in 2014 until 2016. And she was also the chair of the Hungarian Women's Lobby from 2012 to 2017. Her main fields of expertise are women's history, promoting women's political participation, the equality model, human trafficking, and gender mainstreaming, amongst others. She's a dedicated feminist with a passion for women's causes. So Bobala, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Tsitsi, and dear colleagues and dear viewers. Let me share you a few personal sentences about why I, in the name of the Hungarian Women's Lobby, an umbrella organization of women NGOs, joined the Brussels Call 9 years ago. Many of the young women you can see selling sex in the streets, brothel hotels, red light districts, drive-through sex booths, mini brothels, disguised as meager shared flats, changing premises every second month, and sex massage parlors of the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and the UK, and via the sex scams streaming from Budapest, are my compatriots, Hungarian. At one point, 90% of prostitutes in Zurich were of Hungarian origin, and 85% of them were of Hungarian Roma origin. Hungary is both a sending and a transit country for trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. According to Agnes Dekol from the Hungarian Baptist Aid and Dr. Erika Tatár from the Ministry of Interior, the vulnerability factors paving the way for this are the following: extreme poverty, hunger, multi-generational social exclusion, low educational and employment level, dysfunctional families, being Roma, living in segregated villages far from Budapest in the countryside, coming from a family trapped in illegal money lending in usury, having survived domestic violence and childhood sexual abuse, having an abusive partner, and having been placed in state childcare. The average age for getting into prostitution is 14, 15. A 14, 15-year-old girl is a child. The buyers are always men and they are always adults. We do not know what the vulnerability factors to become a sex buyer are, if there are any. 94-year-old Edith Eva Eger, a Hungarian-American psychologist and writer, a survivor of the Holocaust, a survivor of Auschwitz, and one of the elaborators of the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder among Vietnam veterans, held an online lecture yesterday for the Hero Square movement in Hungary, which I watched. Repeating her book entitled The Choice, she said, quote, "We all have a story, but I refuse to be my story. I was victimized, but I am not a victim," end quote. She said, "It is in your power to change your thinking, feelings, and behavior." Now, I take this from the personal level to the political level. It is in Europe's power to change her thinking, feelings, and behavior. Europe's politicians and citizens, men and women, have a choice to make our common future more equal for that 15-year-old Hungarian girl too. It is my honor to introduce to you the Your Future is Equal campaign, and Catriona Graham will be helping you with the slides. Next slide, please. Our campaign was developed with a focus on how we can turn our vision of a better Europe into a reality, driven by real needs and to deliver real impact for women and girls. The partners, many of you you could hear today, are from Belgium, Greece, Hungary, Lithuania, Malta, and Spain, and the European Women's Lobby and other NGOs came together to explore how to bring our messages to those in power. What are the realities of the sex trade and what is our cause for change? Next slide, please. About the sex trade in Europe, the vast majority of people in prostitution would prefer not to do it. And I'm quoting Farley from 2003, so they are all publications. 9 out of 10 women in prostitution have said that they would leave if they could. Many people in prostitution are there because they have been trafficked or sold against their will. Next slide. 65% of trafficking in the EU is sexual exploitation, and 95 of those sex trafficked are women. So I think I'm going to repeat this number. 65% of trafficking in the EU is sexual exploitation, and 95 of those sex trafficked are women. This means, this is European Commission data from 2018. This means that while not everyone working in the sex trade has been trafficked, almost all people trafficked for sex are women. Next slide, please. The sexual exploitation disproportionately affects women and girls and prevents true equality, as we have proved. In Europe, 90% of prostituted people are women and girls, and 97% of sex buyers are men. 75% of these prostituted girls and women are between 13 to 25 years old, as we have also heard previously. So what is this equality model? It treats people selling sex differently from the pimps and the brothers who exploit others. So it is the pimps and the brothers who are criminalized. Next slide, please. At the same time, it means decriminalization, and it helps individuals working as escorts or in brothers. Sorry, can we go back? Yeah, sorry, thank you. So working as escorts or in brothels to know that the law is on their side. So when we speak about the equality model, women who sell sex, women and boys or men who sell sex, they are decriminalized, and it is the pimps and the brothers who are criminalized. Next slide, please. The equality model also means that there are prevention and exit measures to allow all people the choice not to be bought or sold for sex, and supports equality and opportunity for all. So it is, I repeat, the pimps and the brothers who are criminalized, and it means decriminalization for the prostitutes and offering prevention and exit measures. Next slide, please. And finally, the equality model also holds sex buyers responsible and accountable for the impacts of their behavior. So apart from decriminalization for women who sell sex and prevention and exit measures for them, it criminalizes pimps and brothers and criminalizes sex buying. Thank you. Next slide, please. What else can we say about the equality model? What does it support? It supports freedom on the individual. How? Because it respects and decriminalizes individuals in prostitution, despite what others might say. It supports freedom to change because it enables people who choose to leave prostitution. It supports freedom of choice. I repeat this sentence. The equality model supports freedom of choice. How? It supports people who don't want to enter prostitution. Next slide, please. And what does the equality model enable? It enables freedom from slavery, because it empowers victims of trafficking and coercion to escape. It enables freedom from exploitation, because it ends the culture of commodification and objectification of women's bodies. And it supports full and free consent. It supports an individual's continuous control and power to refuse sex. Thank you. So welcome everyone for the Her Future is Equal campaign for a Europe free of prostitution. Are there any legal basis for what we are saying? Yes. The fundamental treaties of the functioning of the EU, Article 83.1, includes trafficking and sexual exploitation of women and children. While there is an anti-trafficking directive and the directive on child exploitation and pornography, there is no EU legislative action combating the sexual exploitation of adult women. So women above 18, when we speak about adults, that's what we mean, women above 18. Whereas in Hungary, the age of consent is 14, for example, that's what I'm saying. So an adult is anyone above 18, even though it is a recognized Euro crime. Next slide, please. This gap must be filled through legislative action urgently to support the thousands of women affected by sexual exploitation daily and to respect the EU's core values. The resulting legislation should be part of a comprehensive legislation tackling the full continuum of violence against women and girls. The legislation must have an end demand at its core, as per the Anti-Trafficking Directive, and being comprehensive in tackling all forms of sexual exploitation and abuse, as per the Directive on Child Sexual Exploitation and Pornography. The directive must also seek and foresee harmonization of all existing and upcoming EU laws relative to violence against women and girls, including those mentioned above. So I hope that in the coming weeks and months and years, our campaign, Her Future is Equal, for a Europe free from sexual exploitation, the Brussels call relaunch, will be successful, and we'll be engaging with many of you, including politicians, of talking about these issues and making real change. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bobala, for the presentation. I think it answers a lot of questions as well around the equality model and the legal basis for why we're advocating for it. So at this point, I would like to thank all the panelists, Anna, Alissa, Romina, Marie, and Bobala, for your presentations and your insights. I think it's been a really interesting session. We probably have time for perhaps a couple of questions. So the first one is around getting young women on board. So the question is, how can we bring more young people on board to support our cause? And what role can challenging pornography have on this? So I don't know, Alissa or Romina or perhaps Anna, if you may want to respond to that question. Yeah.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, how can we bring more young women on board to support our cause? Yes. And what role can challenging pornography have on this?
Yes, to get more women on board, like in Malta, the Malta Women's Lobby is in fact already working on this, and we have formed an organization for younger women. And it's a grassroots approach where we are sharing experiences coming from different fields. And we always talk and discuss about different topics that affect us in everyday life. For example, the objectification of women. We are organizing, for example, discussions on broader platforms because, yes, sadly, as I said, culture has impacted our young girls and adolescents, and they are groomed from such a very young age that we need to counterattack this constantly. And we need to make them understand that we need to empower women and girls, that this is, even prostitution, this is a patriarchal tool which maintains women and girls in subordination, in subordinate and inferior positions. And regarding how to tackle prostitution, we need to enhance sexual education in schools and take it from a feminist approach and teach the realities and teach our young boys and our young girls that what is being shown on screen, it's not the reality. And there's a mix-up here, and several studies have identified how, yes, children, unfortunately, and grown-ups misconceive what they are seeing behind the screen, and they internalize what they see, and the behavior then is reflected in the behavior and the attitude and the violence. So we need to highlight, we need to start from a young age. Education is key. So we need to get to work together to address these issues in our cultures, and to highlight how we are addressing that every individual has a potential, a strong potential, and we believe in the diversity of humanity, and we cannot allow slavery anymore to happen. This is what it's all about. I hope I addressed everything.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And the last question, so, the person is asking, I would like to ask about the holistic approach that the equality model provides. How does this model create viable options and opportunities for women trying to leave prostitution? And the second part of the question is also, what are your views on the EU's obligation to protect and empower women equally across all member states, rather than the unequal and fragmented approach that we currently have? So the first question is really around the viability of the equality model. What are the, how does it create viable options and opportunities for those trying to leave prostitution? And the second part is looking at a more, sort of equal EU approach across all EU member countries. Yeah.
May I say a few words as in an answer?
Yes, please. Yeah,
just very shortly to the beginning. Unfortunately, I am not from a country where the equality model is already in place. But let us not forget, but for about 20 years, Sweden, Norway, Iceland, Ireland, France, and recently, although that country is out of the EU, Israel has introduced the equality model. So there are countries which have tackled this problem, how to help girls and women leave, what kind of exit programs, what kind of social programs are available for them. So I think if these countries and their politicians think that it's important to export these ideas, we are very happy to hear that. That's just a short answer for the first question. So the countries have been dealt with this question for a long time, and I'm quite sure that their social experts can answer this question.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Anna, do you want to come in? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add on the holistic approach for women who are exploited in prostitution through the Nordic model. I mean, for us, for migrant women, this is a fundamental part. There is no more Nordic model or equality model without providing viable exit programs for women who are caught in prostitution. And it is very practical. It doesn't mean, okay, exit program. What does it mean? It means that the women who do not have a documented status have access to the legal status, that they're not deported out of the country, that they're recognized as victims of violence. And it's not just, they're victims. There is a certain set of rights attached to this status. And this means compensation, education, labor rights, access to labor, right? So all of those things, and this has to be done by the specialist NGOs. So together with this, the state must support those organizations. And they are an overwhelming majority, specialist, feminist, women's rights organizations who understand violence against women, who should be, the state is obliged under the equality model to legally and financially support those organizations. Yeah. And then we have the proper implementation. And this is crucial. Police, it takes time. They have to understand, okay, today we have this law. What does it mean? It means you stop arresting women. You stop harassing women. You start holding perpetrators to account and not the women. And this is a matter of time. And we have to be realistic. It's not like you start the Nordic model and tomorrow everything will be perfect. Yeah. Of course not. It takes years.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that intervention.
Can I jump in quickly before we get?
Yes, please. Yeah, 1 minute, Alissa. Yeah.
Thank you, Tsitsi. I just wanted to go back to what Romina was saying before to answer the first question, and I completely agree with you. From my experience of working with girls and young women, they are already in board, and that's a point that I really wanted to make, because they are more and more exposed to pornography every day. They feel very close to this issue, and they always testify about how it impacts negatively their lives, how teenage boys are treating them in school, how it affects their everyday lives when they are walking down the street. Every young woman under 15 years old has already been harassed in the streets. So all of these issues are directly linked to pornography and prostitution. And what we need to do is not bring girls and young women on board, they already are, is actually giving them options to fight this system. So
yeah, thank you very much. And thanks everyone on the panel.
Can I just jump in very, very shortly, just to the holistic approach? I just want to say we do not have to adopt the equality model like it's made in all the other countries. We can make it, if we want to, we can make it better, we can form it, and we can put in all the experience we have until now with legal prostitution and in countries who have adopted the equality model. So this is not something made from stone. It's something we can work on it and make it better to get really the holistic approach. And I really want to address what Anna said. It's really, really important that the women can stay, because even at the moment, the women have to leave after they have testified in court. 2 weeks later, they have to leave to their home countries without any support or anything. So this has to change very soon. And this is something really we have to talk about in between Europe and the racism, the inner European racism, because this makes all this happen too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I think someone makes the point that, in fact, in France, they're advocating now for the second phase of the abolitionist law. Yeah, so I think, all great points. So thank you very much to everyone on the panel for your great contributions. I'll now hand over to Katrina, who's chairing this, the second session. So Katrina is the Policy and Campaigns Officer with the European Women's Lobby, who is also coordinating the Brussels Core Coalition and Her Future is Equal campaign. Also, just to remind people that the hashtags for the event are hashtag End Demand and hashtag Her Future is Equal. So I'll hand over now to Katrina. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tsitsi. And you just took one of my jobs reminding about the hashtags, so really appreciate it. It's great if everyone can be promoting our messages right across social media. So thank you very much for that. And thanks so much to all of the really powerful speakers from our first session. I think that has set us up very well now to turn to the political sphere and to consider what is it that our political champions have identified as the key next steps en route to seeing a future free from trafficking and sexual exploitation. During this session, we'll hear from experts in the European institutions, as well as a member of the UN CEDAW committee about their next steps and actions to date and forthcoming in relation to this important issue. Panelists have been invited for the very reason that they are in the best possible positions of political power, where they have the opportunity and mandate to bring forward real changes for women and girls. To be sure that we remain solutions focused and realistic for this session, we will begin by asking each panelist the exact same question. What will you do in your role to end sex trafficking and exploitation in human beings in the next 4 years? Our first respondent to this question is Mr. Olivier Onidi, the Deputy Director General of DG for Migration and Home Affairs at the European Commission, with particular responsibility over security. He also headed the Secretariat of the European Commission's Task Force for the Security Union, and since March 2020, he is the EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator. Please, Mr. Onidi.
Thank you, Catriona. Good afternoon to all of you. It's a privilege to take part of this to this event. Another colleague of mine, Lucy, is with us as well. One of the drafters of the many documents we've produced lately on the different ways to better fight trafficking of human beings. We have a lot of respect for what your organization is doing in quite a number of areas, and we applaud as well the efforts now with this campaign to actually get all sensitized to the comprehensive set of answers which are embodied in this equality model that has just been presented in the first panel, which contains a lot in terms of protecting the victims, but also stopping the use and the exploitation of individuals. Now, to your question, I will reply in a very simple way. What will we do? What will I do? I will undertake to implement fully the strategy, the new strategy against trafficking of human beings that has just been adopted by the European Commission a week ago. So in there, you have quite a number of lines of action. It's been some years now that we hadn't updated and also modernized with a fresh look the different set of actions that the EU could take at its level in order to shoulder what member states are doing. And there are many organizations, many also individuals, including in the authorities of member states, that are very active in the fight against the trafficking of human beings. But unfortunately, and responding to many of the questions being put to us, it's not the COVID-19 or the digitalization of our societies that push on us the need to come with a new strategy. I think at the heart of the need to come up with a new set of action is the fact that unfortunately exploitation of human beings is on the rise. It is, despite all the efforts of everyone, it is growing. It has become a very well established also part of the palette of services that nourishes organized crime. So it has become extremely professional, the way human beings are being exploited. It is very much a international phenomenon. And it is not something that is imported from the outside to the EU. It is very much an EU problem, and our set of activities need to start from home, because most of the victims being exploited are actually EU citizens, the one being exploited in the EU. So, linking now with the focus on sexual exploitation of this conversation, I would say a number of aspects in the new strategy, which probably will come as reinforcing significantly not only your campaign, but also effective measures against individuals being sexually exploited. The first one is the fact that, contrary to what we did in the past, we focus way more on reducing the use of the service provided by individuals being exploited. And in that category, in the first panel, the figures have been again cited. Most of the individuals being exploited in the EU, at least, quasi 70%, are being exploited for sexual purposes, and as was very well said, it entails a very strong gender dimension. Nearly all of them are women or young girls. So, in the center of this quest to reduce the demand, so to say, we have a very strong call in the strategy, and I think that is quite a novelty given the very sensitive nature of that, to criminalize the effective knowing use of individuals being exploited. It's quite something. It is something, I think, that will very much also be nourished by your concept that you are developing, this equality model, because if in our preparation for a legislative proposal, which will be really with the objective of criminalizing the knowing use, we will of course try to capture the essential elements of what you describe in your equality model, and notably, of course, the focus on the victim in terms of protecting the victims, and the focus on criminalizing not only the one who provides, who is orchestrating the provision of these services, but also the ones that knowingly use such services. So I think that's a very strong element, and an element that came also very strongly, I think members of the European Parliament will be speaking, something that we took from their political call to actually now go a step further and have at EU level. You have again in the panel first reminded us that we have the legal tools to do so. We can act and have a legislation that puts a minimum level of harmonization in terms of the criminalization of such things. There will be also a lot more resources being provided in terms of shouldering activists and also people on the ground, notably civil society, in their duty to protect, to identify, to detect, and also to desensitize. So all the work in terms of prevention of individuals being falling into the trap of exploitation. That is another very important line of action. The other one will be the renewed focus of what our commissioner calls making or putting a halt at this culture of impunity. So stopping this culture of impunity, in also there deploying a set of measures which hopefully will be more effective in terms of cracking on the organizers of this traffic, those exploiting individuals, cracking on the revenues generated, because we know that the revenues generated out of this form of exploitations are immense, again on the rise. So we'll come also there with hard legislation in terms of asset seizing, asset recovery, and also through the rule of law mechanism at EU level, like we have done on anti-corruption, also have a more specific focus in order to look at the way member states deploy efforts in terms of their judiciary, in terms of their law enforcement capabilities, to actually crack on that crime. So to really aim at stopping the culture of impunity. Third part will be the protection of victims, and here again we take notably this call very seriously that some just made in the first session. We have to protect the victim in all sense. So we will be looking at also forms of allowing better safeguards in terms of providing a residence, providing the opportunity also to enter into the job market for victims. So if we will be improving the overall referral mechanism across the EU in order to have, from the identification of the victim to the sanctions being taken against the perpetrators, a whole chain that is accessible to all. We will also aim at closing the remaining legal loopholes in many member states that too often have the unintended effect to actually deport victims and put them back into a situation of extreme risk. Finally, on the international aspects, this is because we are all in together. We will continue activities shouldering international organizations to help countries around the world to implement the different protocols that are available, notably, of course, in the context of the UN, but also in the context of Greta, the Council of Europe. We'll continue also supporting technically countries in taking measures, domestic measures, in order to fight the trafficking of individuals. So a few aspects that hopefully will be useful for the debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deputy Director General Onidi. It seems like there is so much potential in this new strategy. And of course, we really welcome the Commission's renewed energy towards tackling impunity, targeting demand for sexual exploitation, and most importantly, ensuring access to justice for victims. So a lot there that is really promising, and we look forward to hearing more and working with you around the implementation of the strategy. We turn now to members of the European Parliament, beginning with Soraya Rodriguez Ramos, a member of the Renew Europe group, Spanish lawyer and politician who has been serving as a member of the European Parliament since 2019. MEP Rodriguez was the rapporteur on the recent parliamentary report on the implementation of the Anti-Trafficking Directive. So we look forward to hearing her response to this presentation on the new strategy and her commitments to action for the next 4 years.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends. Good afternoon to the panel. I would like to thank the European Women Lobby for inviting me, and thank you, Catriona, for your moderation. It is a real pleasure to speak after the anti-trafficking coordinator, Mr. Onidi, who does an important work. All the people around this virtual table agree on one thing: human trafficking is a crime against humanity. It violates life, health, physical and moral integrity, sexual freedom, and human dignity. By using violence, threats, coercion, and extortion, traffickers turn people into commodities. This is why it is important to be here at the launch of your campaign, Her Future is Equal, to call for action to realize in a European Union free from sexual exploitation and human trafficking, and to discuss the way forward. This moment is perfect because the new strategy on combating trafficking in human beings has just been published, as just mentioned by Mr. Onidi, and because the Commission is working now on the preparation of the new directive on gender-based violence to be presented in autumn 2021. We all know that violence against women is the root cause of sexual trafficking and sexual exploitation. So we have to ensure that the Commission will include sexual exploitation of women in the new directive, since it is already recognized as an EU crime in Article 83 of the treaty. This is a political momentum that we need to use. We have this opportunity now. So if you ask me what would be my role to end sexual exploitation and trafficking in human beings in the future, I would say that we have three main areas of action. First, the criminalization of the use of services of exploited and trafficked women. Second, the monitoring of the online space that is selling and exploiting girls and women. And thirdly, the recognition of the work of the civil society working with trafficked and sexually exploited victims. First, we need to work in the direction indicated by the parliamentary report on the implementation of the Anti-Trafficking Directive and build upon the new strategy on human trafficking. In our parliamentary report, we call on the Commission to revise the directive to require all member states to include the use of services of the victims as a crime in their national legislation. We know that trafficking would not exist without the necessary cooperation of the so-called users, the persons who are willing to pay for the use of the services of victims of trafficking in human beings. They are the key players in the expansion of this crime. The new strategy by the Commission includes many recommendations of our report. One of the key aspects is the recognition of how the high demand for sexual services drives trafficking of women and girls in the prostitution market. On the other hand, the Commission commits to access the possibility of modifying the provision of the Anti-Trafficking Directive on criminalizing the use of exploited services from victims, establishing minimum EU rules. I would say that this is a great starting point, but we need to do more. Only by addressing the root causes of sexual trafficking will we be able to end this crime. Secondly, we have now the opportunity to tackle online sexual exploitation in the new parliamentary report on cyber violence. We need to be rigorous and serious in calling for further regulation to be able to monitor the online space. Online is the place where most sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and recruiting of trafficked victims takes place in European societies today. Women and girls are simply not safe on the internet. For human trafficking, we know that the internet and social media are key in recruiting and attracting potential victims. In my work as shadow rapporteur on the cyber violence report, I will insist on requiring internet platforms to develop more effective tools to protect women and children in the online space. We need to have the new Digital Services Act addressing in depth to use of cyber violence, online exploitation, and online trafficking. Traffickers have adapted perfectly to the digital age. To combat them, we need to be more efficient and more prepared. Thirdly, I think that we would not be able to prevent and fight this crime without the valuable work of the organization of the civil society. I have recently asked the Commission to dedicate specific and increased funding to the NGOs working with women victims and trafficking. We have to recognize more your role and your incredible work. Every day you are rescuing and saving the lives of women and girls victims of trafficking. You are protecting them and providing them with the possibility to rebuild their life and have a future free of violence. In conclusion, the crime of human trafficking has only increased in the Union and globally. Half of the victims are European citizens, and most of them are women and girls used for sexual exploitation. Only in the EU, in one single year, criminal revenues of sexual trafficking are estimated around 14 billion euros. In Europe, sexual trafficking remains the most common form of trafficking, as 60% of the trafficked victims are for sexual exploitation, and 92% of them are women and girls. We all know that the crime of trafficking for sexual exploitation is based on the vulnerability of women and girls, the huge economic benefits that the sexual business generates, and the very high degree of impunity of criminals. This is why we need good legislation, a strong political commitment, and adequate resources to enable a transformative change. It is needed, especially now that the COVID-19 pandemic is disproportionately affecting women and girls, making them more vulnerable to trafficking, nervous, and invisible. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, MEP Rodriguez. We couldn't agree with you more about the potential of the Digital Services Act in targeting and responding to the reality of the sex trade online. There is most certainly huge potential there if we can bring it in line with other pieces of legislation and make sure there are targeted responses in that important piece of legislation. We also agree and really welcome and celebrate your support for civil society resourcing. We recognize the increase that has been made to the Daphne Fund this year, but we need to see this replicated in AMIF to make sure that we see really targeted and focused resources recognizing the gendered nature of trafficking. And of course, agree with you around the need to go further in criminalizing the use of sexual acts of those who are exploited in the sex industry. We definitely welcome Mr. Onidi's comments around the commitment to looking at reviewing the Anti-Trafficking Directive, but as has been mentioned in some of the comments, we would also look for the removal of the term knowing within that piece of legislation because of the challenges that we face in actually prosecuting, bringing forward prosecutions while that term knowing is in there as the minimum standard. So that would definitely be a really key message for us. I'm now really delighted to welcome fellow Irish woman, Mep Francis Fitzgerald, to the floor. A parliamentarian for over 20 years, she has served as the Taoiseach, which is the Deputy Prime Minister from 2016 to 17, one of only 4 women to have ever held that position. She is a member of the FEM Committee and Econ Committee. She was elected Vice Chair of the EPP Group in March 21 and is the EPP Coordinator of the FEM Committee since July 2019. Thank you, Francis Fitzgerald.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Katrina. Lovely to see you again, and well done to the lobby for holding this important seminar today on this topic. Look, let me maybe throw a slightly different lens on this in terms of how I see it going forward. The first point I want to make, and you've asked about what we'll do ourselves, the first point I want to make is that how you progress, in my experience, on any particular issue depends to a degree on the view that's been taken on gender equality at a particular moment in time. And, you know, different topics go up and down that agenda. So the question is, how do you get this topic to the top of the political agenda? And I would say that while there is a lot of progress at the moment, and I really want to commend Olivier and Maria Vasilidou, who occupied the position before, incredible work that they're doing, and the Commission for the recent publications and documentation and commitment. That's really important. But let's also balance that with how difficult it can be to have these issues taken on board by the leadership of all of our institutions to a sufficient degree. And I'm struck by a phrase I've been hearing recently: let's take the burden of gender equality, and some of us maybe might not see it as a burden, but an opportunity to do an awful lot more. But let's take the burden of getting gender equality off the shoulders of women and put it on to some of our male leaders. And I think that's something that we really have to continually focus on. And also, for example, it can be very difficult, even within the EU institutions who lead equality around the world, I have no doubt, to, for example, agree to gender budgeting. And we know how much budget matters. There's all sorts of excuses about it's too hard to implement and so on. So money matters when you're trying to get, programs done and actions undertaken and NGOs working well together, sharing experience. It costs to do that, despite all the volunteerism that's involved. So, we now have council meetings where we cannot, in a communique, have the word gender equality used. How extraordinary, because a number of member states are rolling back on the term because they don't like it, because it signifies LGBTQ plus rights. So, on the one hand, half full, half empty. So you always have to look at context. So myself and my colleagues, and Maria Neukel is here as well today, my colleagues on the FAM committee will be working at a macro level to make sure we can get these issues top of the agenda where they should be, and that people take the kind of responsibility they should, those in leadership roles across the political parties and across the institutions. So that's the first macro point I would make, that you can never give up on that, because that determines the status of the issues that you often raise. Having said that, there's an awful lot of good work going on, as we've heard, in this area, and there's more to do. My own experiences in Ireland as Minister for Justice, when I brought in the Nordic model, and what I've learned from doing that, first of all, how important it was to work, as Soraya has said, you've got to work with politicians, you have to work cross-party, you have to hear the voices of those in the front line if they are brave and willing enough and able to do that. You have to engage civil society, and you have to get the leadership of political parties and key male and female champions involved, and it takes time. But there is a model there. I certainly am very happy to share that model and the experiences. And I want to take up a point that was made earlier in the earlier panel, that we don't all have to do it the same way. But what we should be doing, and I hope the EWL can contribute on this, is we need to learn. We're having a review here in Ireland at the moment, a 3-year review. The legislation isn't perfect. And beware of those who seek to undermine it all the time. The legislation isn't perfect, so we can learn as we go along. We can learn about exit strategies. We can share best practice on exit strategies. We can share best practice in working and training with our police forces and on the implementation of the legislation. And there are lessons to be learned. So I think I will be very interested in working with you in the future on what those lessons are and how we, if you like, perfect the model of legislation that we have as we go forward. A couple of other points I would make. There's a lot of experience at the level of our civil service, our public servants, and we need to be absolutely sure that we are having access to that, because in Ireland, in the EU institutions, many people have huge experience on this, and we must be careful that we don't talk to the same people again and again. We have to reach out if we want to change this. I would make the point that the DSA, the DMA, and the online exploitation that Soraya talked about, it's really important. And a lot of the work I do on amendments is getting amendments in to other pieces of legislation that take account of the gender perspective. And we can do that in relation to this issue when it comes to the online and the platform providers. Another area I would point to, which I think we need to keep a very strong eye on, this is criminal activity. This is huge money-making activity across the member states. This is criminal. It is about following the money. There is a new anti-money laundering directive that's going to be coming in, where we will have one supervisor for anti-money laundering. We want to make sure that this issue is high on the agenda when it comes to money laundering and the pursuing of money that is being made in this way and the exploitation that's involved. So again, I think we have to make sure that those with responsibility for anti-money laundering, that they follow the money in these areas. They can follow it through pornography, they can follow it through the advertising that is so popular right across the member states. Who's paying for it? Who's behind it? Where's the money coming from? And we really need to follow that up meticulously. And we've shown in Ireland with the Criminal Assets Bureau how this can be done very successfully, for example, with drug gangs and other criminal gangs. And you can have local criminal assets bureaus who gather local information as well as international. So again, I think this is another area. The point I'm making is that this crime cuts across many different areas. And I would also say that I would like to see a directive on trafficking for sexual exploitation. And I hope Olivier would consider this. And I hope he's listening, because I think this could be really important if we want to tackle this crime. It is extraordinary to me that in 2021, this crime of trafficking, where if I take Ireland again, and I know all my colleagues here could take every other member state, that you can go across Ireland, across cities, across small towns, people hardly believe that this is happening in their town, in their city, that we are having women, very often migrant women, very often undocumented, who are being exploited in the towns and cities of our member states, and sometimes do not know what country they are in. Now, if we cannot put a crime like that at the top of our agenda, where are we in terms of protecting women? Extraordinary to me that it isn't actually even higher up both national agendas and international agendas. So I think that's the goal, really, and this conference is part of that, this approach. And I do think that you get all sorts of rationalization and excuses from surprising people about the Nordic model, couched in civil liberties, couched in other language. It's just an excuse, really, to avoid tackling this issue. But it's surprising how often it's there in the undergrowth. And something that we need to be very aware of. But I think it's changing as more countries are standing up to these criminals and doing something about it. So I think, though I will leave it at that, those are the points that I think at present need to be focused on. I think it's about us all working together across the institutions, implementing the strategy, highlighting these points, and having specific crimes and improving our, noted in our legislation, and our legislation improving all the time as each country takes it on. And then we can also review the legislation in our own countries. But I will conclude by saying that in Ireland, we saw the most extraordinary coming together of the NGOs, civic society, and politicians. And I think it's a really good model if you want to have this type of legislation brought in across our member states. Thank you very much, Katrina.
Thank you so much, MEP Fitzgerald. And I think you've brought forward many really crucial points and practical suggestions for how we can work together going forwards, particularly around cross-party work. And I think this very event and this session is testament to the willingness of so many of you to work cross-party to champion this issue. Best practices and how we can come together for lessons learned if we have a harmonized approach across the EU. I think it's very important to emphasize that's one of the best routes forward for having best practice evaluation. We can see that through the Anti-Trafficking Directive, and the potential for a directive on sexual exploitation would mean so much in terms of our ability to evaluate and really share lessons learned around legislation on sexual exploitation. So really welcome those comments, and happy now to turn to MEP Maria Neuchel, who is a member of the European Parliament since 2014. She is the S&D coordinator for the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality, and is committed to changing at the national legislation on prostitution in Germany towards the equality model. Please, MEP Neuchel.
Hello, thank you. And I think my word before, I'm from Germany and I fight for the Nordic model. And I think this is important to see and to hear that women from Germany fight for the Nordic model, and I'm not alone. First of all, thank you to the European Women's Lobby for putting together this great event on such important issues. The campaign on our kickoff to end sexual exploitation is much needed. I have different rules, therefore I have different goals. I think I have more rules than one, and I think I have more goals. First, as a member of the European Parliament and S&D coordinators in the Committee of the Women's Rights and Gender Equality, the combating of sexual exploitation and the fight against human trafficking is an issue close to my heart. My work my work as a coordinator in FAM is to make step by step the door open for a clear position first in my own party, in my own working group, then in more working groups in the S&D, then in the S&D as well, and then cross-party work together. I have started the discussion about a joint position on prostitution about 6 months ago in my own political party. We have had 3 different workshops. The first with the European Women's Lobby, and I thank you once more to the European Women's Lobby. The second with Tailia, a Swedish organization who works with women that want to exit prostitution. And lastly with FAPS about the commodification of women bodies. We exchanged in very informative discussions, and we're now trying to draft a paper that can be used in later stage to work on legislation. We also pushed for a hearing in the initiative and an initiative report in the FAM committee on regulation of prostitution in Europe. This was my idea and we pushed it, and I say thank you to Francis Fitzgerald from the EPP and from the other groups. They have open ears and say, yes, this is great, and we fight for this hearing on the one side and for the INI report on the other side, and we have open ladies nearby. And the impact of gender equality and cross-border implementation, I think it's get the ball running. The next step is to find committees who work and fight with us. For my side, the next committee after the Gender Equal Committee must be the DEVE Committee. For me, it's not acceptable to fight against prostitution, for example, in Kenya. To fight against prostitution, for example, in slums, but not fighting against prostitution, for example, in Berlin. Why? I can't understand. And I think the committee, the DEVE committee, must be on our side. And for me, as an S&D person, it's only possible to have one position, not one position for the African ladies and one position for the German one. We need one position, and they must have a clear words for all ladies worldwide. The next step after the FAM committee, the DEVE committee, I would say the AMPL committee. Why the AMPL? Many members are thinking sex work is work. I say sex work is nothing with sexuality, and there is nothing with work. But there is a link to the AMPL committee, and we have to fight first in the FAM, then in the DEVE, and then we have to fight with the AMPL committee that it is not allowed to work. What do you like? If the work situation, you know, I don't think it's work, but it's against the society and it's against the gender equal situation, then we have to stop it. This, I think, would for me be the next step. We need the position not only in the heart, we need the position on the paper. And I fight in the S&D for a clear position paper against prostitution for the Nordic model, and a clear position. In the last votes, the S&D group always vote in a big majority against prostitution. But we have not really a clear paper. And I think this is missing, and I have to do it before. First, my step is to work in my own group. The next step is to make cross-border, cross-party work. I think this is important, and I know that many colleagues, Francis, for example, stand on my side. My second role is my role in Germany. In the national in the national context, I am very committed to changing the social climate in these issues. and I would like to do it in the SPD party, and I would like to do it outside. In Germany, the situation for women in prostitution is unacceptable. It is really unacceptable. In Berlin, you can buy the body of a woman for €1 for 1 minute. It's crazy. It is like, it is on the street, it is in the park, it is between the cars. €1 for 1 minute, and it's really a shame. And the speaker before, who speak about Germany, she had say everything in the right clear words. This is the situation. The legalization bring no bring no good income and good insurance and so on for the woman. No good income, no insurance, no own flat, no possibility to work in other parts. No, it is the beginning of the end. In the same time in Germany, we founded first, we founded a national network to put these issues on the political agenda. I was one of the person who founded this national network, and we called it Pro-Sex-Kaufverbot. It is the wording for now it is forbidden to buy. And we are a group inside the SPD, and we work to get grower and grower and grower. We have a network inside my party, my German party, to make the wording and the ideas about prostitution bigger and bigger. And this network is a SPD inside network. But in the same time, and this is really great, in the same time last year, in Germany was founded an umbrella organization. And the umbrella organization have the word, the name Nordisch Model. And this is an umbrella organization with more than 30 groups, NGO groups from different cities, from the church, from the help systems, and so on. More than 30 different groups are now in Germany in an umbrella organization for the Nordisch model. And more and more we see that the ideas from us are in the newspaper and are on TV. We see it. There is a dynamic, and this dynamic is really great. I fight for this word with a new translation. Prostitution is not acceptable a translation for sex worker. Prostitution, my translation is violence against women and attack on human rights. This is my translation, and I think we have to fight for a new wording, and at least we have to fight for a change of the law, a change of the situation in the parliaments, and so on. And for me, as the coordinator from the S&D FAM committee, for me it is absolute the basic work. We can speak about the pay transparency, we can speak about everything, but the basic situation is to stop the violence against women. And prostitution is one of the craziest, the worstest situation for women. And to do it, if you like to do it, I think this is, oh God, what is the English word? This is a nice story. This is a pretty woman's story, but not the reality. Thank you for hearing. Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you so much, Emmy Boyne-Michael. I think you've laid out some really practical suggestions and information about the work that you are doing to bring together not only your political group within the parliament, across the committees, and both in your home party back in Germany. So really welcome all of the actions that you're taking. And of course, we're here to support you with that however we can. So next I will turn quickly to MEP Marlon Bjork, who is next to give her response. She's a member of the Parliament since 2014, is of the Swedish Left Party and the European United Left Nordic Green Left. She's a member of the Parliament's Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality and the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. Please, MEP Bjork, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and a big thank you for the invitation to be here with you today. It's very nice to see some old faces and new faces, and it's very. I think it gives wait to see that this topic is so high on the political and feminist agenda still. I am from Sweden. It's the model which was so well presented by Borbala from Hungary. That's called the equality model now. For some years it was called the Swedish model because Sweden was the first country that actually put this in place. And it was feminists, of course, that asked for this for 15 years, even more, before it became reality. And I must say that in Sweden, each country has its own story. And I followed very closely the Irish process to turn off the red light, as it was a very successful and campaign that Francis just talked about. And in Sweden, it only became a reality when women were almost 50% in the national parliament. So I think it also matters, you know, and kind of to what extent does gender equality is it present in the rest of the political landscape, in the rest of what we are doing? And in that, I want to join what Francis said, that we will not succeed in this with the equality model unless we also succeed to put gender equality on the top of the agenda. Because violence against women's bodies, and prostitution is a form of violence against women and girls, as we've heard, because girls enter into prostitution. And if we don't, you know, manage to put gender equality on the top of the agenda, it will be very difficult for us to advance our understanding of what the actions are needed to stop this violence. So I'm very, very proud to be from Sweden, where we've had this model. It has, you know, it is regularly just a little bit criticized, but generally there's a very big public support for the equality model in Sweden. There are things that we will have to get better at, the exit strategies, and not the least the issue of migrant women. And I will come back to that, because the question to me was, what will you be doing the next 4 years? And I am adding those 4 years to the 5 I have done before, where you know that the Swedish Left Party and big parts of the left group has been an ally to promote the Nordic model. And I would say like this, I think the model in the Netherlands and Germany, it's a human rights crime against women, but it's also the most conservative model you can think of, I think. And the fact that some countries now are opposing any kind of conclusions on gender equality at council level, it goes hand in hand with that. You know, gender equality is not legitimate for these countries and for these forces. And I think we have to take that threat very, very seriously. I will, in my work and in the work that I do also as linking to national parliament, and I want to, because that hasn't been mentioned so much by other colleagues, I want to make the link between European level and national level, because when we have been successful, it's when we have been able to draw upon the positive experiences, when we've been able to meet at European level, to bring that experience to the national level. We have seen how countries like Ireland, France, Norway, not the EU countries, but Norway and Iceland has adopted this equality model. And I think that, you know, we have to be really strong in supporting this dynamic between the national and international level in order to succeed. I also want to make sure that we strengthen women's rights. As I said, gender equality has to be top of the agenda. If we cannot, you know, strengthen women's rights overall and get this focus, then we will not succeed in the equality model either. We have to focus on exit strategies and the prevention. And I work a lot in the Libe Committee on migration policies, and I can only join those that have been said that we have a system and we have migration policies that generate vulnerability, that generate women and girls that become more and more easily victims of perpetrators that want to exploit for sexual exploitation. And I think I didn't hear anything from the European Commission to address that, not anything. Speaking about referral mechanisms, we have a migration policy, we have policies in place at national level with the residence permits and restrictions there that actually generate victims of sexual exploitation in the prostitution industry. So I think that is a shame. It's a shame for my country, it's a shame in many of the countries, and it's a shame at EU level, and it has to be addressed. I will just join the ones that have said that I'm not at all happy with the issue of criminalizing the knowing use of trafficking victims, services of trafficking victims. everyone has said, the word knowing doesn't have any sense. It will be impossible for law enforcement to work around that. So that just has to go. And this is a call to the Commission to do its work properly. Just take that word out. I also think that I look forward in these 4 years to work with my fantastic colleagues, Francis, Maria, Ramona, that we make sure that we lift this issue on the political level. Because the worst thing is that somebody says, "Oh, well, don't wake up. It's complicated. People get very stirry, etc." Yeah, feminists always stir up. We always stir up. We're always trouble. But nothing less than having equality for women, stopping exploitation of girls and women in prostitution is good enough. So those are my commitments. I look forward to work with my colleagues in the European Parliament, with civil society, with all you people that work out there. And it was very nice to also see some old and new faces here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MEP Bjork. I think you've brought up so many important points about the role that the European Union can play in bringing member states together and the dynamic there, the role that our current migration system, particularly at the EU level, has in creating a system that enables trafficking and exploitation of women and girls. There, I think we would note in particular from the Women's Lobby's perspective, the disappointment that we have that the Asylum and Migration Pact doesn't have more of a dimension recognising the needs and rights of women and girls in it. And of course, the role of feminists in stirring trouble. That is what we do, and it's what we will continue to do to make sure we raise our voices. So now our final speaker of this session is Dalia Leonarte, who is a member and former chair of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, that is the CEDAW Committee, and she's a fellow commoner at the Lucy Cavendish College at the University of Cambridge. Dalia led the process for the recent CEDAW General Recommendation on trafficking in the context of global migration, and we can look forward to hearing more about this recommendation and her views on what can be done in realising the aims of this general recommendation in the coming years. And I think this responds to one of the questions that we had earlier on about the 1949 UN Convention and bringing that into the modern day, having something that's newer. So I think this general recommendation is so important as part of that framework. Thank you so much, Dalia.
Okay, thank you very much, Catriona, for introducing me and for inviting me to introduce General Recommendation number 38 that was produced, adopted by the CEDAW committee last year. And the document itself, it's a very comprehensive general recommendation that is focused on almost all aspects related to trafficking in women and girls, on prevention, assistance, protection of victims, also on financial remedies for victims, on identification, and especially, of course, of trafficking in women and girls in conflict and post-conflict situations. But today I will be focused only on the aspects that are most related to our topic, that is trafficking in women and girls for sexual purposes, and how it is facilitated and related to prostitution. And today it's my second dialogue with members of European Parliament, just because back in 2014 I was invited by female parliamentarians in the Committee of FEM. Yes, and we discussed the same topic back then, and it was inspired by the wonderful British member of the parliament, Mary Honeyball, and at that time I represented to members of the parliament very rudimentary and very first signs in the CEDAW committee that we most probably are going to draft this future general recommendation on trafficking. And then I invited Mary Honeyball to CEDAW committee. And she introduced this revolutionary, for many years, this revolutionary idea that clients should be criminalized. So that is how it's all started. So last year, as I said, CEDAW committee adopted general recommendation number 38 by the title, Trafficking in Women and Girls in the Context of Global Migration. And despite there were very heated debates over the link between trafficking for sexual purposes and prostitution that was already put in the GR text, the general recommendation 38 was adopted by the CEDAW committee unanimously and without any reservation or dissent from 23 committee's experts. But here I have to a little bit to stop and to let you know that after the adoption, the CEDAW committee was attacked heavily by international sex work organizations, very heavily and very intensive. And here I am enormously thankful to Anna Zhobnina, who actually coordinated the response to this attack from another camp, from the point of view of abolitionists. And it helped. And now our general recommendation number 38 is recognized, I believe, even in OHCHR as the most groundbreaking general recommendation that has been adopted by the CEDAW committee. So the adoption of the general recommendation 38 put actually an end or severely damaged attempts to legalize today prostitution globally and recognize sex work as a normal economic activity, especially for migrant women, as once it was said by former CEDAW expert from Switzerland, who believed and still believes that prostitution is really the best work for migrant women. I had an honor to lead the working group of drafting the General Recommendation 38, and it was my responsibility to set forth clear principles to inform the state parties to the CEDAW Convention, which are 189, of their obligations to suppress all forms of trafficking in women and exploitation of the prostitution of women in accordance with Article 6 of the CEDAW Convention. As the starting point, the committee took, while drafting the General Recommendation 38, the 1949 Convention for the Suppression of the Traffic in Persons and of the exploitation of the prostitution of others, that recognizes that prostitution and the accompanying evil of the traffic in persons for the purposes of prostitution are incompatible with the dignity and worth of the human person and endanger the welfare of the individual, the family, and the community. The approach based on the 1949 Convention and today on Palermo Protocol must address the demand side that drives the exploitation of the prostitution of women, all of which are perpetuated and promoted by the commercial sex industry. Accordingly, the General Recommendation number 38 puts it plain and clear that, first of all, trafficking for sexual purposes is inevitably connected to commercial sex. There is direct link between the two. And secondly, that the demand side should be addressed in national laws. Para 63 of the General Recommendation 38 puts it following: investigate, prosecute, and convict all perpetrators involved in trafficking in persons, including those on the demand side. CEDAW Convention is a soft law, but actually we always saying that it's a little bit conflicting, but we are saying that our convention and our general recommendations are obligatory to all 189 state parties to the convention. It is also very important to stress that the CEDAW General Recommendation 38 goes further than any international and regional legal documents regarding violence against women, if they talk about violence against women today. For example, Istanbul Convention, which is the major regional document combating violence against women, does not refer to prostitution as a form of violence against women. In general, it talks very little about prostitution. Instead, what we did, the General Recommendation 38 explicitly defines prostitution as a gender-based violence, as a form of violence against women. Para 10 of the General Recommendation 38 states that the committee acknowledges the trafficking and exploitation of prostitution in women and girls is unequivocal, a phenomenon rooted in structural sex-based discrimination, constituting gender-based violence. Actually, it's one of the biggest achievements of the General Recommendation 38, since the demand side of trafficking for sexual purposes and exploitation of prostitution are defined here as the forms of violence against women and girls. As a result, they should be criminalized. And the last point, around 70%, as it was said, of trafficked women in Europe come from other European countries. It's Europol data. This points to a serious issue concerning intra-European trafficking. Currently, the laws on prostitution differ substantially from one EU country to the next, meaning that a woman who in one country is considered vulnerable, in another country is considered a criminal. Coordination from the European Union is central to combating the sexual exploitation of women, and as such, the demand side and prostitution. And here just I would like to say the last sentence. If 23 members of the CEDAW committee, which come from different parts of the world with different cultural backgrounds, with different cultural norms and religion, we agreed unanimously on this document that encourages and criminalizes demand side and define prostitution as a violence of women, I think it should be done and agreed upon 28 countries in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Vallarta, for such a strong message to leave us with, and for all of the work that you have done towards this really crucially important general recommendation. As you've mentioned, it wasn't without its challenges through the process, but I think the results that we see is really powerful and gives us such a strong basis now for the work that we are doing across the EU and with the European institutions towards concrete action on sexual exploitation and trafficking. So really, it's laid such strong groundwork for us to continue to work from, and we really welcome that. Now, unfortunately, I see that we are running somewhat behind time, so I believe that we won't have time to take questions for this session. So thank you so much for everyone who has made a question in the comments. I can say we will, as part of this campaign, be following up, of course, with all of the fabulous speakers here today, and we will have future discussions where we will bring those questions and make sure that we get robust and strong answers. I think the one question that I would highlight is the question around will and can we have a directive on sexual exploitation brought forward at the EU level? To that, I would say yes, we can. We have a clear legal basis, we have the clear means to do so, and I hope that we can all work together to see that happening. As we come now to the close of our launching event, I'll hand the floor to Vivian Teilbaum. Vivian is active in social and health affairs, the environment, gender equality, and the fight against racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, and homophobia as part of her role as a member of the Parliament in Belgium since 2004. She's also currently the co-founder and chair of the Feminist Observatory on Violence Against Women in Belgium. Please, Vivian, thank you.
Thank you so much, Catriona. And to start, I would really like to thank all the speakers today for your time, for your expertise, and also all attendees for joining us to mark this really important moment. I would also very much like to thank EWL, Joanna, and especially Catriona and the whole team for such a great work. We do hope this campaign will bring a turning point and prompt increased action to tackle trafficking and sexual exploitation at EU and member states levels. Participation in this campaign is important to me as a Belgian parliamentarian and activist. In Belgium, there is no clear policy concerning prostitution and sexual exploitation, although the law condemns pimping and exploitation of prostitution. And the last National Action Plan against violence against women includes prostitution. We see that municipalities and regions are trying to cope with the development of different forms of prostitution on their territories. So, just to remind you, in '65, we ratified the UN Convention, and the Council of State admitted that international standards, in this case, the rules laid down by the Article 6 of the 49 Convention must be considered as directly applicable because of the obligation to protect fundamental rights. So in '85, Belgium also ratified the convention, a CEDAW convention, and Article 6 of which we saw that provides that state parties shall take appropriate measures, including legislative provisions to repress in all their forms trafficking in women and exploitation of prostitution. So, although we have all these laws, we still need to raise awareness because today a law project is on the table by the Minister of Justice to legalize prostitution. And it's really, as all equality advocates, I'm really worried about that. And so we need to raise awareness, and this campaign, I hope, will be crucial for us. So thank you to EWL and to all of you Brussels partners. Just a few words about this afternoon session. The first session presented brilliant voices, and I saw the remarks in the chat from the Brussels Call Civil Society Coalition for a Europe Free from Prostitution. All Brussels Call members are committed to ending sexual exploitation in Europe. Through lobbying, through advocacy, public engagement, and the use of media, we can advance the cause of Brussels Call in each of our member countries. While each of us, we are operating in a different context with specific sets of legal and cultural challenges, using strategic messaging and having access to evidence base on the sex trade can be highly useful in advancing our shared goals. In the first session, we heard powerful civil society and survivor voices, and I was very touched, as each time when I hear survivors, so thank you, on the reality of sexual exploitation and trafficking across Europe. Evidence shows that it's a highly gendered phenomenon that works across borders, where criminal networks profit from women's inequality and poverty. And we can see in all of our countries how legalization of prostitution fuels demand and increases trafficking. We heard it's a system that preys on overwhelmingly young, migrant, poor, and vulnerable women to be abused by powerful men with privilege and choice, but it's never tackled in the way it should. It's really dazzling how it's never tackled in the way it should. We heard how the equality model demonstrates that hope and change is possible for the women and girls of Europe and beyond. The equality model is really an integrated approach that prevents violence and ensures accountability, justice, and support. We heard a clear message to political leaders at national and international levels to do more, not only to tackle specific issues of trafficking, but to be ambitious in tackling the sex trade in its entirety, recognizing that trafficking and prostitution are inseparable and must be treated as one. This is how the pimps, how the traffickers, how the sex buyers view the trade, and so must we if we want to make change happen for women and girls that are affected. So what can we as political leaders do more of? In my municipality, we came up with creative solutions on taxes. We came up with shelters. We came up with different ideas where there is a lack of harmonized Belgian abolitionist approach, but it's challenging and we need a better and more holistic and harmonized responses. We heard from Marie and also from MEP Neuschel that of the reality of the life in the sex trade under regulation. We see that it clearly doesn't work, and the arguments used to promote that model are in fact fake news. And we must look to the promise of the equality model for a truly equal future without violence. And this is where we come to the second session, where we heard many commitments to action from political champions working their hardest to end sex trafficking and sexual exploitation at the European and international level. We heard from members of the European Parliament who voiced their many commitments to action both within their home countries and within the European Parliament. They have clearly been committed to the issue for many years, and we know we can count on you to bring those successes forward, ensure the Parliament upholds its abolitionist principle, and support and encourages the Commission to bring forward holistic legislation on sexual exploitation with a wider framework on combating violence against women and girls. We also heard from the acting EU trafficking coordinator, and we will be counting on you to have a commission that is accountable and that will prosecute trafficking as it should and link it clearly to sexual exploitation. As we know, prostitution fuels trafficking. You heard it, we heard it. And you and your team can rely, I really want to stress that, on the many partners, and you have seen the comments in the chat here, the many partners here to both support and encourage these necessary actions that have to be taken. We also heard from Dalia Lenarte from CEDAW about the new standards they are setting at a global level in reinforcing how interconnected trafficking and prostitution are, and their recommendations for how to tackle this issue through a focus on demand for this exploitation. It's so important that all of us work together to challenge the norms, the stereotypes, the violence, assumptions, and stigma that is at the core of driving the continuation of the sex trade. So today's event has focused on political responses, but every one of us is also a member of the public, and we have power in that role to maybe as a friend, family member, peer. We know that the sex trade happens in every community across Europe, so it's really crucial that we come together and use our voices to make a clear statement that we cannot accept normalization of the sex trade. We must work together for a better future for all women and girls. So as such, please, each and every one of you here today, commit to promoting Her Future, the Her Future is Equal campaign. Follow the @Her Equal Future on Twitter, spread its messages of hope and resilience through your networks. I know it's not always easy out there, as it is in environments like the ones we have today, where we are strong and united, but it's so necessary to advocate in all circles. Together, we can end sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. Together, we can ensure her future is equal. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Vivian and to everyone for participating in today's event. We will now be closing this session, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.